Hello, and welcome to Scary Stories for a Rainy Night, the place designed to creep you out before you drift into a peaceful sleep. If a restless mind is what brought you here, I hope these stories are exactly what you need. If you enjoy the video, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment below to support the channel. It helps more than you know. I'll be recording new stories live on a regular basis, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. To get notified, make sure you're subscribed with the notification bell turned on. I am also continuing to minimize ads for a better listening experience. Thank you for your support and for being here. Now, let the stories commence.
They say the sea keeps its secrets, but at St. Jude's Rock, the sea doesn't whisper its secrets, it weeps them. And if you're the only one on that rock to hear it, you become a secret too. My job is unique. I'm a systems technician for a company that automates remote industrial sites, power stations, weather outposts, and this time, a lighthouse. The job was straightforward. Spend 1 week at the St. Jude's Rock Lighthouse, a 100-year-old stone tower miles off the coast of Maine, and upgrade its old failing systems to a new, fully automated one. Essentially, my job was to make the role of a lighthouse keeper obsolete forever. Ironic, considering what happened. The journey out to the rock was a grim preview of the isolation to come. I was the only passenger on a small, rusty fishing boat, captained by a salty old man named Silas. For an hour, all I saw was a churning gray ocean and a gray, unforgiving sky. Then it appeared on the horizon, a jagged black rock jutting out of the angry sea, with a tall stone tower perched on it like a tombstone. "She's a lonely place," Silas grunted over the roar of the engine as we got closer. "St. Jude's Rock, patron saint of lost causes. Fitting, eh?" He helped me unload my gear onto a slippery stone landing. The air was thick with the smell of salt and bird droppings. Before he left, he put a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder. His face was deadly serious. "Listen to me, son," he said, his voice low. "You're a man of science, I can see that. But this place, it's old. It has stories. If you're out here at night and you hear a woman crying on the wind, don't go looking for her." "A ghost story?" I asked, with a nervous smile. "It's a warning," he said, his eyes fixed on the dark water. "They call her the Weeper. Legend says she was a keeper's wife who lost her child to the sea and then threw herself from the top. When you hear her cry, it means a big storm is coming. And she's not crying for her baby. She's crying for the next soul the sea's gonna take." He gave me a final, grim look. "She's crying for you." With that, he got back on his boat and left me utterly alone on that tiny, God-forsaken rock. I brushed off his story as superstitious nonsense, the kind of tale old sailors tell to spook outsiders. That night, the sea was perfectly calm, the sky clear. The silence was absolute. I was at the top of the tower, in the glass lantern room, staring out at the endless black water. And then I heard it.
faint but unmistakable, carried on the still night air the distant, heartbreaking sound of a woman sobbing. The sound lasted for maybe a minute, a ghostly lament that seemed to come from all directions at once, before fading into the silence. I spent the rest of the night with every light in the keeper's quarters on, trying to convince myself of a rational explanation. A seal colony, a flock of strange seabirds, the wind whistling through a crack in the rock, but none of them fit. It had sounded too human, too full of a grief that was almost tangible. The next day I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself with wiring diagrams and control panels. But the old man's story and the weeping I'd heard had infected my thoughts. During a break, I found the old keeper's logs, leather-bound books filled with a century of daily entries. I skimmed through them. The early entries were mundane: weather reports, shipping traffic, maintenance notes. But the further I read, the more I found strange, unsettling passages. Keepers complaining of a profound melancholy that settled over the rock, of auditory illusions, of the sorrow of the stone. I found the entry from 1928, written by a keeper named Alistair Finch. It was about his wife, Ilara. The entry was short, his handwriting shaky. October 12th. The storm took her. Ilara was lost to the sea. The light is all I have left. It was a tragic, lonely story, and it seemed to confirm the legend Silas had told me. The second night, the sound returned. It was louder this time, closer, a desperate, soul-crushing sobbing that seemed to vibrate in my bones. It got inside my head. I started to feel a wave of sadness wash over me, a deep, profound despair that wasn't my own. It felt like her grief was a sickness, and I was breathing it in. I called my boss on the satellite phone, my voice trembling slightly. I told him about the strange crying sounds. He just laughed. "Thomas, you've been alone on a rock for 2 days. Those old places play tricks on your head. Get the job done and get back to civilization. Ignore the ghosts." He didn't believe me. No one would. I was completely alone with this. As if on cue, the wind began to pick up. The calm sea started to churn. A storm was rolling in, just as the legend and the weeping had predicted. The crying was now a constant presence, its sound woven into the howl of the wind and the crash of the waves, as if the woman and the storm were one and the same. I stood in the lantern room, the tower now shaking from the force of the waves, and stared out at the churning black water. In a brilliant flash of lightning, I saw something in the waves below, being smashed against the base of the rock. A pale, white shape. For a terrifying second, it looked like a woman in a long, white dress. The storm was a monster. The wind shrieked like a banshee, and waves exploded against the tower, sending tremors all the way up to the lantern room. I was trapped. The satellite phone was dead, the antenna likely damaged by the storm. I was in a stone tube in the middle of a hurricane, miles from another living soul, and the weeping was no longer outside. I could hear it inside the lighthouse with me. A faint, sorrowful sigh from the bottom of the winding spiral staircase,
a choked sob from an empty bedroom. The entire tower was steeped in her grief. Then the light started to act strange. The new automated system I had been installing began to glitch. The massive beacon, which was supposed to rotate in a steady, predictable sweep, started to behave erratically. It would stop, focusing its powerful beam on a single, empty patch of the raging ocean for a full minute. Then it would start flashing in a strange, frantic pattern like a panicked Morse code I couldn't understand. I thought the new system must be failing. I decided to switch back to the old manual system. I climbed to the clockwork mechanism and grabbed the massive cold brass crank handle used for emergencies. The moment my fingers touched the metal, a jolt like an electric shock shot up my arm. My vision exploded. I was seeing something else, some other time. I was seeing through the eyes of the old keeper, Alistair Finch. I saw his wife, Ilara, her face a mask of tears, climbing over the railing of the lantern room. I felt his crippling despair, his absolute helplessness, as he was too late to stop her. I saw her fall, a white shape, swallowed by the black, churning sea. The vision released me, and I stumbled back, gasping. The legend was real. But this wasn't just a sound, an echo of a past tragedy. It was a presence, a thinking, feeling, hostile presence, and it was trying to communicate through the light. The light, my only connection to the outside world, was now its voice. As I watched, horrified, the beam of light moved again. It traveled down the side of the tower and stopped, painting a perfect, brilliant circle on the heavy iron door at the base. The weeping, which had been a faint ambient sound, was now loud and clear, and it was coming right outside that door. Then came a new sound, a sound that was impossible. A hard, heavy, rhythmic banging on the outside of the door. Something out there, in the middle of a hurricane, on a rock, surrounded by 100 miles of violent ocean, was trying to get in. I spent the rest of the night huddled at the top of the spiral staircase, a heavy wrench in my hand, listening. The banging on the door was relentless, a thunderous counterpoint to the storm, and beneath it all, the sound of that furious, heartbroken weeping. This wasn't the sound of a sad ghost. This was the sound of a predator, furious that its prey was locked inside. My mind raced, trying to find some logic in the madness. I remembered the final keeper's log I had read, the one from Alistair Finch. My memory of it had been hazy before, but now, after the vision, it came back with a terrifying clarity. The entry didn't just say Ilara was lost to the sea. There was one more sentence, a sentence that now chilled me to my very soul. I have given the sea what it wants. Now the weeping will stop. She is at peace. It wasn't a suicide note. It was a confession, a transaction. The terrible truth dawned on me. The weeper wasn't Ilara, the keeper's wife. The weeper was the thing in the ocean that took her. The legend had it all wrong. The weeping wasn't a warning of the storm. It was the storm's herald. It wasn't the sound of grief. It was the sound of hunger. The crying was the lure, a mimicry of human sorrow designed to draw you out, to make you open the door, to make you come to the water's edge to offer comfort. Alistair hadn't lost his wife. He had fed his wife to the thing in the water, a sacrifice to appease it. As the sun began to rise, the storm broke. The wind died down. The banging on the door stopped. The weeping faded away. An eerie, unnatural calm fell over St. Jude's Rock. Silas, the boat captain, arrived the next day. The sea was as calm as glass. He found me sitting on the steps, a hollowed-out, shaking wreck. I didn't say much on the ride back. I couldn't. As we approached the mainland, Silas finally spoke. "Did you hear her, lad?" he asked, his eyes on the horizon. "Did you hear the weeper?" I just nodded, unable to form words. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "Aye, most do." He was quiet for a long time. "The town, we have an arrangement with the sea." And then he told me the final, horrifying truth. There was no automation company. There was no contract. The job listing I'd answered online was a fake, posted from a library computer on the mainland. The job was a recurring lure, a trap that the desperate little fishing town had been setting for decades whenever the storms got too bad or the fishing holes got too thin. They'd send some unsuspecting outsider, some lonely contractor with no family ties out to the rock, an offering, a sacrifice to feed the sorrow, to keep the storm and the weeping thing it brought with it away from their shores and their boats. I wasn't there to make the lighthouse keeper obsolete. I was there to be the next keeper's sacrifice. And somehow, against all odds, I had survived. They had failed. And as we pulled into the harbor, I could see the faces of the townspeople waiting on the docks. They weren't looking at me with relief. They were looking at me with fear and a cold, hungry disappointment. Every paranormal investigator dreams of finding a place that's truly haunted. We found one, the old Mangrove Point Lighthouse. The problem is, the legends got it all wrong. It's not that a ghost haunts the lighthouse. It's that the lighthouse is the ghost, and it's still hungry. My friend Marco and I had a small YouTube channel dedicated to exploring abandoned and supposedly haunted places. We weren't famous, but we were passionate. Our holy grail was the Mangrove Point Lighthouse on the Gulf Coast of Florida. It was decommissioned in the 1960s and stood at the end of a long, crumbling causeway, surrounded by miles of dense, humid mangrove swamp. The legend wasn't your typical ghost story. It was about the lighthouse's architect, a brilliant but obsessive man from the 1890s named Alastair Finch. The story goes that Finch became obsessed with creating the perfect structure, a spiral staircase that was mathematically flawless. He went mad in the process, claiming the spiral was a divine engine, and then vanished inside his own creation just before it was completed. The locals said the lighthouse was a trap, a perfect, endless spiral that never reached the top. For us, it was the perfect story. We drove down the causeway at dusk. The air was thick, hot, and alive with the buzzing of insects. The lighthouse stood at the end, a tall white needle against a blood-orange sky, looking deceptively serene. Getting in was easy. The old iron door at the base was rusted, partially open. The moment we stepped inside, the air changed.
It was hot, still, and completely silent. The oppressive humidity of the swamp outside was gone, replaced by a dry, sterile coolness. The inside was a single circular stone room. In the center, the legendary cast-iron spiral staircase began its ascent, coiling up into the pitch-black darkness above like the skeleton of a great serpent. "This is it, man," Marco whispered, his voice full of excitement as he switched on his camera. "The Devil's Coil." I switched on my EMF meter. Nothing. The place was electronically dead. We began our climb, our footsteps echoing loudly in the stone cylinder. I counted the steps aloud. 10, 20, 30. We passed the first arched window, a slit in the thick stone wall. Below us we could see the causeway and my car glinting in the last light of the setting sun. Everything felt normal. We were just two guys in an old abandoned tower. The excitement was palpable. We thought we were in control.
We kept climbing. The darkness above seemed to swallow the beams of our flashlights. The air grew colder. The silence was absolute. I kept counting. 120, 130. It felt like we should be nearing the top, but the staircase just kept winding upwards. "Dude, is it just me, or is this thing way taller than it looks from the outside?" Marco said, his breathing getting heavier. "Just keep going," I said, though I felt it too, an unnerving sense of wrongness. At step 162, we reached another window. I shone my light through it, expecting to be much higher up. But what I saw made my stomach drop. Below us was the causeway and my car. They didn't look any smaller. They looked exactly the same as they had from the first window. "That's impossible," I whispered. "No, dude, we're just disoriented," Marco said, though his voice lacked conviction. "All these curves, it's messing with our heads." But I knew he was wrong. Before we left the first window, I had made a small scratch on the stone windowsill with my pocket knife, a little habit to mark my path. I reached out and felt the sill of this new window. My fingers found the familiar, rough groove of the scratch I had made 10 minutes and over 100 steps ago. We had climbed, and we hadn't gone anywhere. We had walked in a perfect, upward loop. The legend was real. We looked at each other, the color draining from Marco's face. We had to get out. We turned and scrambled back down the stairs, counting our steps back down to 0. We reached the stone floor at the base of the tower, our hearts pounding with a new, terrifying energy. I threw my shoulder against the heavy iron door. It didn't budge. It was solid, sealed, as if it had been bricked over from the outside. There was no handle, no lock, just a seamless wall of iron and stone where the door had been. We were trapped. The lighthouse had let us in, and now it wasn't letting us leave. Panic gave way to a cold, creeping dread. The only way was up. We had no choice but to climb again, to see where the impossible staircase would take us. We started our ascent once more, the steps feeling heavier this time. We passed the first window. I forced myself to look out. My car was still there, but it looked smaller now, the causeway a thinner ribbon of gray. It was as if our first loop had been a test, and now the lighthouse was actually letting us gain altitude, drawing us deeper into its impossible geometry. We climbed for what felt like an hour, our legs aching, our minds reeling from the sheer wrongness of it all. The staircase was no longer just a staircase, it was a predator. vast landings with doorways leading into rooms that had no business being inside a narrow lighthouse tower. The first door was unlocked. We pushed it open to find a small, perfectly preserved keeper's quarters, furnished in a style from the early 1900s. A wool blanket was folded neatly on a small cot. An old pipe sat in an ashtray on a small table, a thin wisp of smoke still rising from the bowl. The room felt warm, as if its occupant had just stepped out for a moment. But it was empty. We kept climbing. Another 50 steps, another landing, another door. This room was completely different. A child's nursery, decorated in the pastel colors of the 1950s. A mobile of little wooden sailboats hung over an empty crib, turning slowly in a non-existent breeze. A child's laughter, faint and distant, seemed to echo from the walls for just a second, and then was gone. The horrifying truth began to settle in. The lighthouse was a collection, a vertical museum of lost souls. Each person who had ever been trapped on this staircase had been given their own personal, timeless prison. We weren't just climbing a tower. We were climbing through a graveyard of stolen moments. We heard a sound from above us, a faint, rhythmic scratching, the sound of chalk on a slate board. We climbed another loop, our flashlights shaking. We found another door, this one slightly ajar. We peeked inside. The room was an architect's study, the walls covered in complex blueprints and frantic, obsessive drawings of spirals and impossible shapes. Standing with his back to us, a tall man in old-fashioned 1890s clothing was furiously scrawling equations on a massive chalkboard. It was him, Alistair Finch, the architect, a prisoner in his own perfect, terrible creation. As we watched, frozen in the doorway, he stopped writing, and slowly, mechanically, his head turned, and he looked us directly, with eyes that were black, hollow, and utterly empty. We didn't wait to see what the architect would do. We turned and ran, scrambling up the endless spiral, a primal fear giving us a new burst of energy. We had to get to the top. We had to get out. The scratching of his chalk on the board followed us, growing louder, more frantic, echoing up the stairwell. We finally saw it. After what felt like a lifetime of climbing, we saw a final landing above us, with a simple, rusty iron ladder leading to a square hatch in the ceiling. The lantern room, the exit. With the last of our strength, we scrambled up the ladder. Marco went first, pushing open the heavy hatch. He pulled himself up and out. I was right behind him. We emerged, gasping, into the night air. But we were not in a glass-enclosed lantern room. We were on a bare, circular stone platform at the top of the tower. There was no light, no beacon, no protective railing. Just the stone floor and an endless, dizzying drop on all sides. And the view was impossible. We were impossibly high, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of feet in the air. The world below was a swirling, indistinct map, the lights of distant cities looking like fallen constellations. The causeway and the swamp were gone. We were at the top of a tower that defied every law of nature. Marco, his camera still in his hand, filming everything, was mesmerized. It's beautiful," he whispered, stepping towards the edge, trying to capture the impossible vista. "Marco, no! Get back!" I yelled. But he was in a trance. He took one more step. His foot found only empty air. He let out a single surprised gasp as he fell, his camera tumbling after him, and his body was swallowed by the vast, silent emptiness below. His scream never even reached me. I am alone now. I don't know for how long. Time doesn't work the same way up here. The hatch I came through is gone. The stone floor is seamless. There is no way down. I am the newest exhibit in this impossible museum. Sometimes I see the architect. He'll appear at the edge of the platform, a silent, hollow-eyed figure, just staring down at his perfect, terrible creation. Sometimes new people appear, other explorers, other lost souls who made the same mistake we did. They look around in confusion and awe before the height or the despair claims them. I am telling you this now, though I don't know how. Maybe the tower is broadcasting my thoughts, a final, lonely signal from its peak, a new chapter in its legend, my chapter. My daughter Maya and I took a volunteer job at the Point Reyes Lighthouse to escape our grief. The Preservation Society had one strange rule. Whatever you do, don't look directly into the beam of the lens. I thought they were worried about our eyes. After my wife died, the world lost its color. I was just going through the motions, and I could see the same hollowness in the eyes of my 9-year-old daughter, Maya. We needed to get away, to go somewhere the memories weren't in every room. I found a posting from a historical preservation society looking for volunteer keepers to spend a month at the Point Reyes Lighthouse on the rugged Oregon coast. It was a chance to live in a piece of history, to be surrounded by the raw power of nature. It felt like the perfect place to heal. The lighthouse was even more dramatic than the pictures. It stood on a high, jagged headland surrounded by a dark, misty forest of ancient pine trees that grew right up to the cliff's edge. The isolation was immediate and breathtaking. We were given the keys to the small keeper's cottage and a thick, leather-bound manual. Most of the manual was boring, maintenance schedules, weather logging procedures, but one rule, printed in bold red letters, stood out. Under no circumstances should any personnel look directly into the beam of the Fresnel lens when operational. I assumed it was an obvious safety warning, like not staring at the sun. The intense beam could probably blind you in a second. Our only real duty was to the light itself. The station was mostly automated, but the grand century-old clockwork mechanism that rotated the massive lens still needed to be wound by hand every evening at dusk. That first night, Maya and I went up the winding stairs together. Winding the mechanism felt like a sacred ritual, the heavy clicks of the gears echoing in the lantern room. With a low groan, the giant glass lens began to turn, and a powerful, brilliant beam of light cut through the thick evening fog, sweeping across the dark, churning ocean. It was beautiful. Later that night, long after Maya was supposed to be asleep, she came into my room. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice small. "Who are the shadow people?" I was confused. "What are you talking about, sweetie? It's just us here." She pointed out her bedroom window, which faced the sea. "In the light," she said. I walked over and looked out. The lighthouse beam was sweeping past in its silent, steady rhythm. As the beam cut through the thick fog bank hanging over the water, for a split second I saw it.
a massive, distorted silhouette of a man dancing silently on the canvas of the fog. It was gone in an instant as the light passed. A trick of the light, I told myself. A shadow cast by the tower itself. I told Maya the same thing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow hadn't been waving goodbye. It had been waving hello. I tried my best to forget what we saw. It was an optical illusion, a simple explanation for a strange phenomenon. But Maya wouldn't let it go. "He was waving at me, Daddy," she'd say. "He looked lonely." The next night, after we wound the mechanism and the great light began its sweep, we stood at the window and watched the fog. It happened again, but this time it wasn't just one figure. There were two massive dancing silhouettes acting out a strange, silent play on the clouds. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like puppets in a shadow play. One seemed to be falling, while the other reached for it. The phenomenon started to bleed from the outside world into our own. As the light beams swept past the windows of the cottage, the shadows would be projected for a split second onto the walls inside our rooms. I'd be reading in the living room, and suddenly a giant, fleeting shadow of a man would dance across the wallpaper and be gone. The light was somehow projecting these images through the solid stone walls of our cottage. Our safe, cozy home was now the stage. My scientific mind was struggling, so I turned to the keeper's logs again, this time looking for answers. I found the journal of a keeper from the 1930s named Elias Thorne. His entries started out normal, but they slowly descended into a strange obsession. He wrote about the lantern plays and the audience on the rocks. He believed the lighthouse wasn't just a beacon, it was a projector, and the massive Fresnel lens was playing out the final traumatic moments of the ships it had witnessed being wrecked on the coast below. He wrote that the light was a collector of tragedies, playing them on a loop for an audience of the drowned. I dismissed it as the ramblings of a man driven mad by solitude. Then, one night, Maya grabbed my arm and pointed out the window, not at the fog, but down at the base of the cliffs. The light was just sweeping past the jagged black rocks at the water's edge. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice full of wonder, "who are all those people?" I looked. For one brilliant, terrifying second, as the light illuminated the rocks, I saw them. Dozens of dark, wet, human-shaped figures clinging to the slippery rocks, all staring up at us, at the lighthouse, the audience. The next sweep of the light revealed nothing but empty, wave-washed stone.
A primal fear had taken root in my heart. I was trapped on a rock with my daughter, surrounded by a ghost story that was coming to life. My primary duty was to keep the light running, but I was beginning to realize that the light was the source of the horror. Stopping it felt like it would be a betrayal of some sacred duty, a violation of the place's purpose. We were just caretakers. Maya, however, was not afraid. She seemed to be developing a strange connection to the phenomenon. She would stand at her window at night, and as the light swept past, she would whisper to the shadow figures on the wall. "It's okay," she'd say to a fleeting shadow. "You don't have to be sad." I was terrified. It felt like she was inviting them in. The shadow plays on the fog grew more aware.
They were no longer just a reenactment of a distant shipwreck. One night, one of the massive silhouettes, a towering, distorted figure, stopped its frantic dance. It turned, and it seemed to point directly at the keeper's cottage, directly at Maya's window. I had to understand. I had to know what was causing this. That night, after Maya was sound asleep, I went back up to the lantern room. The huge lens was turning, the beam cutting through the fog. I was going to break the rule. I waited until the lens was about to swing past me. I took a deep breath, and for one brilliant, blinding, terrible moment, I looked directly into the heart of the beam. It was not just light. It was a torrent of sensory information. I was flooded with the final, terrified thoughts of 100 drowning men. I felt the splintering of wooden hulls, the freezing shock of the water, the roar of the ocean filling my ears. I saw the faces of the audience on the rocks, their eyes wide with a cold, eternal hunger. And I saw the lens from the inside. It wasn't just glass. It was fused with something else, something dark and organic that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. It wasn't projecting shadows. It was projecting memories. It was feeding the final moments of the dead to the dead. I stumbled back, my eyes watering, my mind reeling from the horror of it all. I had seen the secret, and the lighthouse knew it. The steady, rhythmic rotation of the light stopped. The great beam froze in its path, fixing itself on one target. It was pointing directly at the keeper's cottage, bathing my daughter's bedroom in its unwavering, brilliant, terrible light. I ran. I flew down the winding spiral stairs, my feet barely touching the steps, a scream tearing from my throat. Maya! I burst into her bedroom. The room was filled with a light so intense it felt solid, like I was wading through a river of it. It was pouring through her window, a silent, white waterfall. But the light wasn't empty. It was alive, filled with flickering, whispering, translucent shapes. Maya was standing in the very center of the beam, her back to me. She was bathed in the impossible light. Her small hand reached out towards the window. "They're just sad, Daddy," she said, her voice a dreamy, distant whisper. "They're lonely. They want us to come and watch the play with them." I saw it then, in the heart of the light, a dark, human-shaped shadow. One of the actors from the fog was detaching itself from the beam. It was reaching a long, shadowy arm back towards my daughter's outstretched hand. An invitation. A surge of pure paternal fury cut through my fear. "No!" I roared, and I lunged forward, grabbing Maya and pulling her back out of the beam. I ripped the heavy quilt from her bed and threw it over the window, plunging the room into a blessed, relative darkness. We had to get out. The performance was over, and the actors wanted a new audience member. We fled the cottage and the lighthouse, running blindly into the dark, foggy woods. Behind us, the fixed, accusing beam of light cut a perfect, unmoving scar across the night. We didn't stop until we reached our car at dawn, and we didn't stop driving until the misty Oregon coast was a distant memory. I called the Preservation Society from a motel 2 states away. I told them we had a family emergency and had to leave. The man on the other end of the line didn't sound surprised. There was a tired resignation in his voice. "I understand," he said quietly. "The light isn't for everyone." It's been a year. We live in a new city, far from the ocean. Maya seems happy. She doesn't talk about the lighthouse, and I've never told her what I truly saw. But sometimes I'll find her drawing. Last night she showed me her latest picture. It was a drawing of the lighthouse, tall and proud on its cliff. In the lantern room she had drawn two tiny stick figures, a man and a little girl. And in the powerful beam of light shining out from the tower, she had drawn dozens of large shadow people. Underneath the picture, she had written a single sentence: "Our friends are waiting for us to come back."